Okay, guys, we're back this week. Do you guys have any questions about the stuff we've gone over so far? You guys should have been doing the exercises and stuff at the end. And if you had any questions, bring them back the next week. We're doing the exercises, those questions afterwards and stuff. One of the students had asked me something about one of the questions, and I didn't even really know the answer about something about after a transcript. Who was the one who asked? Was it you? Did you ask me?
Yeah. It was off of a study guide though.
Yeah. And it was if you remember it?
I have to find it.
If a deputy comes in?
Something about the deputy coming in, and it has to do with hold on, I'll find it right now.
Okay. Does anybody have any other questions about any of the stuff that we've gone over so far? Guys, we've covered a lot of stuff, and I know that it's kind of quick and whatever, but we have so many chapters to go over by the end. I mean, this is the pace that we're going to have to keep, okay? So I really need you guys to read the chapters before the week and come in so that you're prepared and you know exactly what's going on. So if you have any questions, then you ask those questions then, okay? You remember?
Yeah, it says if an official reporter has done work on transcript and deputy is called in, what compensation is provided to official? And it says same as deputy. I have no idea what that is.
And I don't even know what they were talking about right there, but I mean,
does it mean if an official is out because they're working on a transcript and a deputy has to be called in, do they get paid the pay?
Read it one more time.
If official reporter has done work on a transcript and deputy is called in, what compensation?
Yeah, I bet that's what it is.
Is provided
I bet that's
to
what it
official.
is. I
Same
bet.
as deputy.
And what it is like if I take a day off to work on a transcript, I don't take a vacation day, I don't take a sick day, I take a transcript day, then is the deputy compensated for that day? Absolutely. And they're compensated at the rate that we get paid. Okay? And that's what they're asking. So it's not, the deputy or the fill-in that's filling in for the official reporter still gets paid, okay? And actually, like here in Bexar County, we have to pay him. The reporter has to pay the fill-in. So we have 30 days. We have 20 vacation days and 18 vacation days and 12 sick days. So that's 30 days. And out of 30 days, I think I used 6 days for vacation last year. I used 24 days, sick and vacation for transcripts. That's how busy my court was. And that's how kind of fast the deadline is. So, but yeah, so the official, if you take a transcript day, you have to pay that reporter coming in. Okay? Any more questions about any of the stuff? Okay, guys. I told you guys last week that we're going to have a guest speaker, and she's here today. And we're going to be talking about CART. So you guys should have read the 6 or so chapters that we're going to be covering tonight. There's a lot of material that we're going to be covering. And our guest speaker is Whitney Alden. She's the guru of CART. So, I mean, she knows it. So, I mean, if you guys have questions, this is the time to ask it. I brought her in because I don't know enough about CART I could read the book and tell you guys, but you guys are getting it firsthand here, okay? So hopefully you guys read those chapters, and if you have any questions, then this is the person to ask, okay? And this is Whitney.
I don't know, it seems like I've met some of you, but I don't think I've met everyone. I know Rachel, and I don't remember your name, but I know we've met Teresa, and your name? Carrie, and Carmen, right?
Yes.
And Diana, Michelle, and Debbie, and Valerie I've met, and what's your name? Jacqueline. Okay. And I was here a couple of years ago, and I kind of did this PowerPoint presentation at that time. Do you guys remember that, or do I have a new group? So there's one that remembers it. I don't think I got very far because we had a ton of questions come up, and we kind of got sidetracked on questions. One of the chapters in this book is a day in the life. So I thought, well, I will go back over a day in the life. And it was funny because I was doing this for a regional seminar for TCRA, and it was in El Paso. And I just picked one day that I was going to log the things that happened that day, and it turned out to be the perfect example of everything that can happen in a day. I don't know why that's there. It won't. Oh well, while that works on that. But I did read the chapters. I had an opportunity to come up here a little early and read through the chapters, and I really think they're pretty accurate. I was surprised at how well everything was written. So if you read those closely, I think you'll get a good idea of what a captioner does, what a cart provider does, the differences between deaf, we have big D deaf, little d deaf, hard of hearing, those different distinctions. The first time I heard that, I thought, they can't really say that, but they do. They call themselves big D deaf or little d deaf. So I thought it was very strange the first time I heard that. And I did see a few things that I flagged going through here. So did everybody get a chance to read? I don't want to talk about things if you haven't read it, but if you did get a chance to read it, you can really rely on what they're saying. I was noticing on page 208, it has broadcast captioners, and it has and actually Ms. Hahn helped me download the PowerPoints from the book, but I can't get that because it's on this computer. But if you look here, there is an illustration of what a captioning screen looks like. And the only issue I have with this is normally at a period on captioning, it's going to start a new line. So you would define your period to start a new line instead of one continuous sentence. And that's just the standard in broadcast captioning. It can be done either way in CART, remote CART, or on-site CART, depending on the type of assignment. And also, if you're working with the same client, they may tell you what their preference is and say, I want as much information on the page as I can have, and then they can go back and scan through and read what they missed. Or some of them like it to be separated that way so that they can see this was a sentence real quickly when they refer back to it. That's really helpful on conference calls, because on conference calls, the deaf or hard of hearing person cannot see the person speaking, so they really don't know by reading lips when the mood changes or when the topic changes. So you really have to pay attention to the person that you're working for, and usually if you're working for an agency, they're going to help you out with that and tell you what that particular person likes. That's just a learning process. And let me just say this right now: if you do work for an agency, whether it's court reporting, taking depositions, or providing CART or captioning, these rules are excellent, and you're going to want to follow them, except when they give you specific rules that they want you to follow, and they will have different reasons. Try to follow the guidelines that they give you, because they have a reason for having those guidelines. If it deviates too much from the rules that published by the FCC or NCRA, you might want to bring it to their attention. But I've had people do that, and sometimes they continue to push that issue. I have a client who wants things done a certain way, and it's not the way that FCC or the guidelines say to do it. So, try to be flexible when it comes to that. But this is an excellent base for what you should be doing. We always refer back to those guidelines. So, a day in the life of a captioner, CART provider. This is my office, and I'm really pretty lucky. I have a big office. It was a living room that I kind of turned into my office. And you can see that I have a couple of monitors, and I have one computer there. Normally I have a second computer. I'm not sure where it was that day. But the computers have a screen that are connected to it and I split the screen, so I'm able to have 4 different screens up. And that's really helpful for preparing for work. I have my schedule up all the time. This over here is my schedule, so that I can look up and see what I'm doing. And the scheduler that we use has a place that you can put all the notes for the job for that day. I really encourage everybody that I work with to keep that schedule open all the time, so if they have a question, they can just refer to the notes section, because all the information should be in the notes section. And then over here is the screen where I had my prep. I was doing a webinar, and this was the PowerPoint presentations that they had sent to us. So I was able to have that up on the screen. And then I can scroll along. I guess the other computer is there. I can scroll along with the PowerPoint as the people are talking. So I'm listening to the webinar, and I have the PowerPoint slides, and that is so helpful, because they'll say something, you're not sure you understood what they said, but the name may be on the PowerPoint, and you're able to look and get that from the PowerPoint. So that's something else that was addressed in the chapters, is how to set up your office, and also how to prep. So those are some good examples of how you want to do that. The more information you have at your fingertips, the better off you're going to be. There's a captioner who I took a course from, and she has things called page ups, and I don't know if y'all have seen those, but it looks like half of an egg, and there's a slot in it, and you can, it's like the egg was cut off halfway, and you stick a page in there and it stands up, and she has about 6 of them. And so she'll print rosters if she's doing a basketball game or she's doing a football game, and she just has her desk covered with those page ups so she can look up at a glance. We also like to print things in large font, because you don't want to be squinting. You have to be able to see it really quickly and remember. You can make note of the brief that you use for that particular name after on the sheet that you print, and those are all very helpful things. So this was actually a very comical day, and it was an extreme day. I won't say that this is a typical day, but I always caption the news in the morning. So I get up about 5:50, and I take over at 6:30, and then I do a cut-in at 10:30. This particular day, I had a class from 11 to 12, a webinar from 12:30 to 2, another cut-in at 2:45, and then I also do offline captioning, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But I had a deadline for returning a file for offline captioning that day, and then I was scheduled on a class from 4 till 7. So that's a pretty solid day. I mean, when you think about prep and answering emails and making sure that all of your technology is working, whether your machine is hooked up properly, and each one of these jobs requires a different type of software. So you have to be familiar with each software that you need to use for that particular job. So that was my scheduled day. This was my actual day. So I got up and I made coffee, which is the first thing I do. And I was on the news at 6:30. My son usually rides the bus, but for some reason I made the decision that day that I would take him to school, because I had that break in between. So I thought, well, I'll take him to school so he doesn't have to ride the bus today. And at 7:43, I got a call from one of my captioners, and her son had been in an accident and couldn't cover the class that she was scheduled for. So my whole plan of taking my son to school had been immediately, I had to make another plan. And so I was realizing that he was still in bed and the bus just went by, so I couldn't use that as plan B. I had to figure something else out. So it was just a juggling situation from there on out for the rest of the day. Those 2 decisions, or my decision and her son having an accident, was a ripple effect through the rest of the day. So at that point, you just start emailing, and I mean, ultimately, he was just going to stay home and miss school that day. If that was what had to happen, that's what had to happen. And my office manager at the time was Teresa Pinnell, and you guys may know her. Does anybody know Teresa? She was a student here at one point. And she never came into the office, but she worked for me online. So she had access to all of the same online programs that I did. And she logged in at 9 o'clock, which is the time that she was supposed to be in. So I was just waiting for her to get in so she could, everything okay? So she could start to coordinate all of this for me, because I was actually doing the class for Kathleen. So it's really hard to instant message or text somebody to take care of it. So that's the rest of my day. I also networked with a person in Austin, Terry McGinty. She has Texas closed captioning, and she was on vacation, but she had her machine with her. So, and even being in a hotel, you can still do remote cart if you have internet access. So we called her and was like, guess what? You're no longer on vacation. You've got to do this class. So she did that. And the 8 o'clock class ended early, which made that a lot nicer. So these are the events of the rest of the day. It was funny because I remember thinking, in that time I was talking to Kathleen about her son's accident. I was like, wow, I'm a counselor too at this point. Just add that to the day. This is just a screenshot of my 2 screens. You know, I had my captioning screen over here and the PowerPoint for the webinar was on that side. I'll let y'all just read through that. It's really funny how small the CART world is and the captioning world, because I will get calls from several people for the same job, and it's really obvious at one point that it's the same job. They'll say, we have a job at 6:30, can you cover it? And you know, I usually say yes if I can the first time, or no if I can't. And then by the 3rd call, I'm like, okay, well let me see what I can do. And it was the same job. 3 different people were trying to cover that same job. Then I had to convince her that she could handle 2 more hours. So, so at this point, you know, 4 o'clock, 6:35, that's a 12-hour day, and that was a jam-packed day. And sometimes I will get instant messages from the captioners that their audio isn't working. And we get audio using Skype a lot of times, or we'll use GoToMeeting or Google Hangouts. And sometimes we use cell phone or just regular telephone. As a firm owner, I guess it's really frustrating that some people aren't able to figure that out themselves, because the answers are all the same, and I've done my part to try to train them, and I've given them sheets on how to handle a situation like that, but they always defer to calling me or instant messaging me instead of looking at those sheets. And everybody gets really flustered when that happens, and I understand that's a part of it, but I would caution you, if you get into that situation, try to learn all the equipment and know how to troubleshoot yourself. Don't rely on texting someone to help you out in that situation. It's extremely frustrating. So only the same ideas I've had. You know, when this happens, it's like I say the same thing, but nobody really seems to listen, and that can get incredibly frustrating. So this is my other computer with I had email going and the schedule going and a couple of instant messages going, one over here in AIM, 2 in Skype, and I was just cracking up because it was quite a day. So it's 8:30 p.m. and I'm amazed that everyone expects me to be at my computer 24/7 because I continue to get instant messages all the time. But I always am there, and I'm like, you know what? It's my own fault because I'm always there. So I'll let y'all read through the rest of that. Teresa was a trooper. She hung with me all day and tried to get everything coordinated as much as she could. So that's the day in the life of a captioner. And some days are like that and some days aren't so bad. But I myself have started doing a lot of offline captioning instead of real-time captioning. And I don't know if y'all know the difference between those things. It's really outlined pretty well in the book. But offline captioning is for a prepared programs or a pre-recorded program. So for instance, a sitcom that you would see on TV, that's pre-recorded. They send it to a caption house, it's captioned, and then it's played, and you can turn the captions on if you need them, or you don't have to if you don't need them. And that's what the closed part of closed captioning means. Open captioning means that the captions are there and you can't turn them off at all. So this was actually an offline captioning job, and it's something that I've been doing a lot more, and it frees me up to answer instant messages since I'm not in a real-time job. So I've been doing that a lot more. And it's also, I don't know how many of you are on the San Antonio Court Reporters student page. I'm not exactly sure what the proper name of that is, but I was looking for transcriptionists, and it's a way that you can really build your dictionary because you'll be exposed to so many different things as opposed to jury charge, the literary, and the Q&As that you hear most of the time. So, and I like it just as much as I like doing educational CART because it's lectures from different universities, and educational CART is one of my favorite things to do because you learn so much. You know, you hear all of these lectures and you're exposed to so much, and you just, things that I would never be exposed to before. One of the students that I worked with went to Trinity University, and she was a classical studies major, so she took Latin and art history and Greek and things that I just never would have taken in a college setting. So I learned a lot about that. So that's the day in life. This was actually the end of the PowerPoint, and things have changed since I had this PowerPoint slide for Chapter 57. It has actually been revised since then, but Chapter 57 is different from Chapter 52, and it is the rule for court interpreters. And court interpreters mean sign language interpreters, foreign language interpreters, and now it includes CART, and it includes communication access real-time translation in the legal setting. And the rule states that you have to be a level 3 certified in Texas or higher to provide CART in the state of Texas in the legal setting. At this time, that's the only mandate for certification for CART or captioning. There is no state mandate for CART providers. There's no state mandate for broadcast captioners. We're looking at trying to get certification, but it's been an uphill battle. We've actually been trying to do this for over 10 years, but it's really hard to find out where CART providers fit. Do we fit with sign language interpreters, or do we fit with court reporters? So, and that we've been in limbo for quite some time. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions about that, about certification for CART providers? One of my soapbox items, and David's heard me say it many times, is none of us are really sure where the myth that CART providers are less than court reporter skill. Truly, CART providers and captioners should be the top tier court reporters, and I think it's more accepted now for students to come out of school at 225, passing your mocks, and go into a captioning program. In the past, it's always been court reporters that have transitioned from the court reporting world into CART and captioning. But I'm meeting more and more students who wanted to go that route, and once they finished their training as a court reporter, then they took a training program. One of the things, and I couldn't find it in your book, but the PowerPoint that I downloaded for this book said that the standard was 180 words a minute at 96%. And that's no longer the standard for cart providers and captioners. Most companies are looking for 98.5% total accuracy rate. So your total accuracy rate is calculated by the number of words divided by the number of errors. So if you have a take that's, let's say, 200 words per minute, and I don't have my chart, I should have my chart. If you drop 10 words out of that 200 words, that's not counted unless it changes the whole meaning of the passage. So, but the words that you do have need to be 98.5% accurate, graded to real-time standards, including punctuation. And, you know, if you put this instead of that, or who instead of which, any of those things, it's graded to real-time standards at 98.5, but it does not include the words that you may have dropped. Because unlike court reporters, captioners have that luxury of dropping a little bit to make, and picking up where it makes sense, to make it clean and readable, as opposed to slogging through something that, you know, they may not have in their dictionary. And cart providers and captioners can substitute a word if they need to when they're writing. For instance, if somebody says humongous, and I can't tell you how many different ways I stroke humongous, it's in my dictionary, probably 10 different ways, but you could just write big or really big until you had an opportunity to get a commercial break and put humongous in there, or come up with a brief word or something like that. So that's acceptable for a cart provider. And that's also why it's kind of hard to go back and forth between verbatim reporting and doing cart and captioning. There was a period of time that I did that, and it was really hard to go back and forth. I know a lot of people who do it successfully now, but I haven't taken a deposition in 17 years probably. So, and I can't say that I miss it just because I love cart and captioning so much. I really enjoy what I do. I learn a lot. So any questions so far, or anything? Have I brought up any questions that y'all have?
How do you get used to just doing those kind of decisions on the spur of the moment?
Well,
you
and
decide instantly, oh, okay, I should write big because they're huge. I mean, mentally,
right.
It takes seconds.
You just get to that point. You're able to do that. When you get out of the mindset that you're going to write totally verbatim, then you're able to substitute those words. And the longer you've done it, just like the longer you've done anything, you start to recognize there's words, and I never have a great example, but there's words that I will fingerspell immediately when I hear them. You know, my heart starts to race, and I'm like, I don't even know how to write that word. And so I just decided I was going to fingerspell it instead of try to do anything else. And there's probably 3 or 4 words. But, you know, that comes with your familiarity with the strokes, which is another reason why I don't think that students should go out and provide cart, because you're in the environment where you're learning to write verbatim, and you need to continue to do that, because if you go out and start trying to write for a student and you don't have the speed and you don't have the ability, I think it's going to be incredibly difficult to be successful as a student and get to the CSR level, because then your brain is not working on verbatim anymore. It's working on changing words, and that's not what you want as a court reporting student at all. So I try to say this all the time. My goal is every day is to write verbatim. When I sit down at any job, that's my goal. And I think that all of us should have that goal, because there are other programs that I had it written down, C-Print and Typewell, and I don't know if y'all are familiar with those programs, but C-Print and Typewell are 70% of the meaning of the lecture. And they're a program that is based off of a computer keyboard and an exploded type software on their computer. So instead of typing grocery store, you know, letter by letter, they would type GRS for grocery store. So it's a form of shorthand, but they don't have the steno machine, and their training is about 6 weeks as opposed to, you know, court reporters who go to school for 2-3 years. And it's great in some applications. There's a lot of students at the elementary school level and high school level that have not lost all their hearing, but if they take their eyes off the teacher to take a note, then they've lost that lip reading ability, and they're not able to see visual cues like that. So C-Print and Typewell can really help some of those folks in that situation, because they can go back. And they hate it when you say this, because they don't say they're a note-taking system, but I don't know how else to describe it. It's like a note-taking system on the computer. But it is in real time. So just like a cart provider would sit next to a student in a university class, a Typewell operator or C-Print operator will sit next to the student. And so the student is watching it in real time. So the information is there. It's not like they have to wait for a transcript later. But they can get a transcript from the C-Print or Typewell operator later. So my point is, we should always strive to be verbatim as cart providers, because if we're not as verbatim as we can be, why not just have a C-Print operator or a Typewell operator? And I think just like court reporters, you know, we should always strive to be real time, because that's a value added to the attorneys, to the court. And if we can't provide that, then, you know, we might be at risk of having another technology come in. So I'm all about keeping up with the best standards for court reporters that we can. Yes?
Question. I had a class where there was a hard of hearing individual, and they had a C-Print technologist come in, and the school, due to budgetary reasons, switched from CART to C-Print. How would you try and convince a school that the CART services are worth the extra money, I guess is mine?
Well, that's a good question. Did everybody hear her question? The worst person to convince the school is the CART provider. The student or the person with the disability, the hearing impairment, they need to go and say, this is not meeting my needs. Also, there's a section in here, the ADA, and it requires a reasonable accommodation. So it doesn't mean that you have to have the best on the market. It's what's reasonable. So if the student was doing okay with the C-Print, then you can't advocate for that. I mean, I run into that all the time. I really do. I run into that quite a bit. And it's the student who decides that it's not enough information. There was a physician's assistant student here at UT Health Science Center, and they wanted to provide CART and Typewell for him, I mean C-Print or Typewell for him, and it was the Typewell operator that said he needs CART because I cannot do this. You know, I don't have the skill to keep up with the medical terminology, and so it was great. I mean, they recognized that they didn't have the ability to cover that job. So, and he didn't want CART because he had had CART in Dallas, and a student from one of the schools up there was providing CART for him, and he was like, I can't read that garbage. I don't know, I don't want it. And so I said, okay, let me sit with you for a week. And we went through all 4 years of PA school with him. It was great. So I don't remember a whole lot about that. It was just slogging through medical terminology. And I really don't know why he's a PA and not a doctor, because he was in all the same classes with the MD students. So I thought that was interesting. But that's a great question. And, you know, if the CART provider or the captioner is the one advocating for CART or captioning, they just think you want a job. So you got to let the student, the person with a disability. And that brings up another point. If you're in a situation with a student, you're providing CART, well, whether it's a student or you know, a business meeting or anything, we are not to advocate for the person that's receiving the service. And that's really hard, because as a court reporter in the courtroom or in the deposition, you're in charge because you're making that record, and you need to say stop, I didn't get that. But in the CART situation, you let the hard of hearing person do that. And they can either say, I didn't hear that, if they don't want to bring attention to themselves. A lot of times they'll say, my CART provider didn't hear that. Or sometimes they'll say, no, I don't care. You know, whatever, I missed it, it's not a big deal. So. But that's also a little bit different too, because you know, you're getting behind and somebody's talking really fast and your first instinct is, slow down, or I didn't get that. But you can't do that, because that really offends the person. Most hard of hearing people, and this isn't all of them, but most hard of hearing people just want to be, what's the word? They don't want to be seen in the room. They just want to disappear into the room and not have attention brought to them. So, and there have been situations where, I also wrote that down. There's a part where I said, don't get too close to, if you do provide CART, don't get too close to the person you're providing CART for, because that can be detrimental. And I've heard of very many situations where the hard of hearing person has really been isolated their whole life, and you come in and you are opening up this whole world to them, and they start to look at you as more than just a CART provider, and they start to think of you as a friend. They want you to help them with their homework. They want to ride home. And one of the people who was cautioned against getting too close to her student that she had been providing CART services for thought it was ridiculous, went ahead and did it. They had a falling out, and now the firm owner is having to deal with that situation because, you know, the CART provider's gone on about her way, but the firm owner now has to figure out how she can smooth over the situation so that somebody else can come in and not get caught up in a previous argument. So that's real important. Just try to keep your distance. Be nice, of course, but sometimes they will really attach to you because you're the only person that understands their hearing loss at that point. Always a good thing to keep your distance, which is another good thing about remote CART, because if you're at home, then you aren't physically present to get into that situation. Although some of the Skype conversations that some of the CART providers have with the students cross the line too. So now I actually have my office assistant logging into Skype and reviewing all of the conversations to make sure that nobody's crossing the line. So it's not a good thing. So any questions so far?
Do other students ask you for your notes? I mean, even though they're like, you know, they're probably got a little tired and
Yes.
you take their notes. And what do you do about that situation?
Well, we've learned over the years too, and there was one student, and it's so funny, because CART was pretty new, and we were still going to the university at that time, and we would email them a transcript. And she was in one of the large universities that had 500 kids in a classroom, and she was selling the transcripts and making money. So she would take them and sell them for $5 to everybody, and you know, she was coming out very well. So we learned at that point, entrepreneur, that's right. So we learned at that point to have an agreement, and the student has to sign an agreement that they won't share that with anybody. And the professor also has to sign off that they will allow that to happen. So before any students get a transcript, the professor signs that it's okay with him or her, and the student signs that they won't share it with anybody. Whether they do or not, we don't know, but we have them sign that anyway. Yes?
When a student has an individual contribution to make, I can see that being okay. But I've been in classes where we had groups of 4, 5, or 6 of us to work on a project, so we had to pool our notes.
Mm-hmm.
How does your agreement work in a situation like that?
That's a good question. I think that we have students who have group discussion in class as well. And so in that situation, we're still providing CART during that situation. And anybody in that group can look at the computer screen and see the translation at that time. Whether or not the student will print those notes and take them to class the next day, I mean, we don't really have any control over that. As long as they're not selling it, or, you know, hopefully people understand that they're not supposed to be sharing it. I think if the counselors that hire us got wind of it, they would definitely not want that to happen. The student understands that that we're doing the best we can depending on the terminology in the classroom, but everybody else in the classroom doesn't understand what our role is. So we wouldn't want anybody to rely on an untranslate or a misspelled word. That student knows that she's not to rely on it. She's supposed to ask questions if it looks wrong. Plus, after the class, we'll go through, we mark any place that we may have misstroked something, and we'll go back and clean that up. So the transcript that they receive should be pretty clean compared to the real-time translation. Hopefully the real-time translation was good too, but you know, there's a learning curve, and you never know what situation you're going to get in. One of the best captioners I know, the other day she was in a what seemed to be a fairly easy job, and it was talking about 1920 to 1940 Russia. She just did the best she could. Nobody had given her any prep, and I mean, we're just not real familiar with that. As a captioner, you have to be familiar with current events. And Anissa Nuremberger, I don't know if y'all know her, but she has a captioning program. She put together a book, and I have it. It's really great because day by day it lists things that happened on that day 20 years ago, 18 years ago, things that are really noteworthy. So I look at that on the day I'm captioning to see, because inevitably they're going to talk about that. On Friday the 13th, they're going to talk about triskaidekaphobia, and they're going to talk about they will test you to see if you have supercalifragilisticexpialidocious in your dictionary. Did you guys all hear about the college basketball player that was playing around with the court reporter with all the funny words? I don't remember his name now.
Saw the video of it.
Yeah. So cattywampus, you know, to see if she had cattywampus in her dictionary and that kind of thing. So it's always something. That's right. So there was something else about when you brought up about. Oh, I think it's also funny when providing CART for somebody in the class. You know, the first week or two, you sit by the deaf or hard of hearing person, and nobody is around. They're like, I don't know what that is. You know, I'm going to go sit over there. Well, after about the third week, when they understand that it's a verbatim transcript of what the professor's saying, and it's like everybody's sitting right behind that student so they can see the screen. So it helps everybody. It doesn't just help the hard of hearing student. And we've really tried to get people to put it up for the entire class. You know, we're doing it anyway. Might as well put it up for the entire class. We don't get a lot of response from that. You know, people see, even as court reporters, people see you in that little machine. They don't know what you do. Yeah, they're like, not going to get too close. You know, I'm sure they've got some sort of magic going on. So, any other questions? I mean, I can go through all my notes. It will be a little disjointed, but I want to answer questions if y'all have them. Rachel?
I guess my question is, did you become real-time certified, and how did you make the transition? How did you prepare yourself to
Great question.
become that like intense level of perfectionist writing? It seems like so overall. I was looking at your screen. It looks like what happens when you get a virus and it goes these problems on you.
Oh, well,
and just prepare to deal with all
Yes.
the aspects. Like, how long did you go through, I guess, a training period before you felt that you kind of were able to do it? You know, kind of the.
Well, I was kind of one of the lucky ones. I started providing CART when we didn't get paid for it. So back in 1994, I bought my first computer, and David's shaking his head.
Never, and I want to get paid for anything.
But real-time technology was there, but it was not portable. And so I think the first television program was real-time live caption in 1988, 1989, something like that. But that's when you went to the TV station and you couldn't just take your computer with you. You know, the computer was there and you had to hook up to the computer. But in 1994, Gateway had a laptop, you know, about this big, it weighed a ton. And I wanted to try my hand at real time. I thought it was going to be the greatest thing. So everybody here knows Breck Record, I'm sure, from the Court Reporting Students website. And he was here in San Antonio. And I was actually working for a firm, a deposition firm in San Antonio. I got out of school in 1989. And Breck was there, and he was, at that time, still interested in technology, the latest, greatest thing. And he was working with this SHH group. And the SHH group is also discussed in this book. I thought that was pretty good. And they were meeting at a hospital room over, not a hospital room, but a hospital boardroom. not a hospital room. And and he would go and provide real time for them as good as we could back in the day, because real time, there was no really true real time theory. Nobody had talked about word boundaries at that time. Nobody talked about using prefixes and suffixes. It was strictly you stroke it out and you fix it later. You know, we didn't learn any real time theory. We were supposed to, but it was not conflict free. And long story short, he ended up moving to Brownsville to take an officialship. So he asked me if I wanted to work with the SHH group. And I said, sure, because I wanted to become a better real-time writer. I mean, that was my goal, because I wanted to do real-time depositions. I wanted to be the first person they called when they had a real-time request. And I went to the SHH group, and there was 30 people maybe in the group. All of them were older and had lost their hearing later in life. None of them were Big D deaf. And they were just so appreciative of what I could do. And we had to turn all the lights off in the room because we didn't have a projector like that. We had an overhead. You guys know what an overhead is? It's not even as good as the thing. And on top of the overhead projector, we put an LED panel. And then you would connect your computer to the LED panel. And your choices were black and gray. So the background was black and it was gray and the letters were black. So the only way they could read it was if we turned the lights off in the room. And they were just so grateful. They were just so grateful that they could have that amount of communication access. And like I said, we didn't get paid for it back in the day. We were just testing the waters to see if there was anybody that would actually pay for this. So that's how I got started. I continued to work on my real time, and I noticed things in my writing that I didn't have words for. I had word boundary problems, but I didn't know that's what we were going to call them 5 years down the road. And so I just started working on those things on my own and just, kept plugging away at it. The person who was the president of the SHH group here in San Antonio knew the person in Austin that I've worked with for 20 years now. And there's a state association as well, and she told Terry, and this is the funny thing, every SHH chapter in the world, in the entire world, I would say, because it's not just located or restricted to the United States, they think their cart provider is the best cart provider ever. So Barbara Hunter goes to Austin and goes, hey, do you know our cart provider? She's the best cart provider ever. So that's how I got connected with Terry. And then once I met Terry McGinty at Texas Closed Captioning, she taught me everything else. And we just worked together. We did a lot of jobs together where she would help me tweak my real time, and she taught me all the technology, and so that's kind of how I transitioned. It's not the same as now where you're on the computer from almost day one, and all of those things are not as foreign to you guys as they were back then. But, I mean, without her, and I always give her credit because she did, she taught me everything I know, and she's the reason why I'm here today. She was a great mentor. And we still work together and still talk every day on numerous technology and how would you do this. She tells me a lot of horror stories, and I tell her a few. But that was my journey. Since then, I've tried to pay it back by teaching several people, and I've probably mentored about 10 to 12 folks to transition from court reporting into captioning. But it's really difficult unless they have started the journey on their own and started to see things in their writing, because it's hard to tell somebody what the goal should be if they haven't begun to see the problems anyway. I noticed that in this, I did a real-time class last semester, and I really noticed that those people who had already started to do some and look at some of the errors or reasons why things weren't translating had a much easier time than the folks who was like, well, I don't know why I need to do this anyway. So it's just a mentality. But the change is significant. It really is. If you want to change from one to the other, and you've been reporting for 20 years. The good thing is you have the base and you've been out in the world and you have a lot more knowledge. But the bad thing is you've developed a lot of bad habits. You use artificial intelligence and you fix it later. And you global 19 things together so one word will translate correctly. So those are no-nos in the cart and captioning world. We don't use artificial intelligence at all. And I won't work with anybody who uses artificial intelligence because that means you don't really know what's in your dictionary. And it's a crapshoot anytime something comes up and you didn't specifically write it that way. There are some companies that are allowing it, and it's getting better and better, but since I don't have the capacity to train people to that level, if they tell me they use artificial intelligence, then I don't work with them. So, any other questions? Did that bring up anything else?
When you say using artificial intelligence, give me an example of what that really plays out to.
Well, in Eclipse, for example, if you have different settings that you can turn on your artificial intelligence, and one of them is number conversion, but you can really customize number conversion to work for you. But when you allow the computer to translate things for you, as opposed to you having it in your dictionary as a specific way that you write something and you follow a theory to write that word, that's what we don't allow. I don't use it a whole lot, so I'm not well versed in it, but the artificial intelligence to choose the correct conflict. So if you write a homonym the same way and you let Eclipse choose the correct one for you, that's artificial intelligence.
It's also when you start using the software more, it learns what you're doing, so it starts guessing what you're going to do now. Yeah, and that's what the artificial intelligence is. It almost starts guessing what you're going to do because you've done it so much.
And I always say, if I'm going to make a mistake, I want it to be mine. You know, I'll own it if I've misstroked something, but I do not want the computer to make a mistake for me. It irritates me when that happens. And there's a few things that you can't get away from. But I do use the number conversion because I use the number bar, and I have a few of those tags, is that the number tags? But that's probably the only thing that I use is for thousand and million, not even, I don't use the one for 100, but for thousand and million, I use that. So let me look at my notes. If you guys, I had made a note on one of these questions. It's on page 212. It says, providers do not need to have a TTY, but should have a fax machine. I thought that was interesting. I've never had a TTY. I don't know why a cart provider would need a TTY, especially now. You can do everything by email or text. And deaf and hard of hearing folks love email and text because, you know, they don't have to struggle to hear on the phone if they can't. So I thought that was a very interesting question because the book is so up to date. I wondered why they went so far back to that technology. I don't have a fax machine. I mean, I can scan a document and fax it from my computer, but I think I thought that was weird. And number 8 is strange too. One of the main services cart providers offer their clients is a sensitivity to the needs of the hearing impaired community. I don't really know where they're going with that, but I would say that's false. The main services a cart provider provides is communication access, not sensitivity to the hearing impaired community. But I was glad to see on page 215, where it talks about communication access real-time translation. That's what CART stands for. It used to stand for computer assisted real-time translation, but they changed it to communication access because communication access are actually the words in the ADA, and it's an accommodation that is in the ADA. And I see CART standing for so many things. Even on people who provide CART, their websites will have a definition of CART and it'll say all kinds of funky things. But it does stand for Communication Access Real-Time Translation. So going back to page 212, it says CART stands for Communicating and Real-Time Translation. So that obviously would be false. It's not stand for that. And there it is on page 211. Under skills, it says writing real-time at 180 words per minute on literary matter for 5 minutes at 96% accuracy. That's the skills portion of the certified CART provider exam through NCRA, but that's not what companies are looking for as far as proficiency to go on air. A lot of companies are giving tests now, and they will set you up and you actually dial in and they will play a recording of a tape and you just write it live and they watch you live, and then they will go back and actually grade it to make sure that it's 98.5, which I'm really glad to see because there's a lot of bad CART providers out there. There really are. And I think unfortunately for those folks, they just don't know what the level should be. They don't have an idea that you can get better than that. And I was one of those people before I started working with Terry. You know, I had never seen a CART provider, and when I went and wrote with her for the first time, I was like, oh, that's my goal. Okay, I need to really step up my game because I didn't realize, you know, people had reached that level. So, and not that, you know. Do you guys take a break in here? Is it just 7 o'clock?
Yeah, we usually go straight through.
Seems like I've been talking forever. A lot of people will ask me about who calls you to provide CART services. And the best answer I have for that, and I stole this from somebody, I don't remember who, is you wouldn't expect a hard of hearing person to bring their own ramp. I mean, a person in a wheelchair to bring their own ramp to a building. So a hearing disability is the same thing. You don't expect them to bring their own sign language interpreter or their own CART provider, that type of thing. So the schools are reluctant to pay for it, but they do have funds set aside for CART. And normally it's the student, like I said, that's going to advocate for those services that makes it happen. And it just depends on, like I said, that reasonable accommodation is usually always thrown back in their face. You know, well, we feel like this is reasonable. So then there's usually a battle between, okay, well, I don't think it's reasonable. So they have to come to some sort of agreement on what's, and also in the ADA, it says effective communication. So you don't want to get a sign language interpreter for a hard of hearing person who doesn't know sign. So the agency or the company can't say, well, we provided a sign language interpreter. Well, that wasn't really effective in that situation because that person doesn't know sign language. You can't provide a Spanish language interpreter for a French-speaking person. So. I often get asked about bad captioning because everybody says they see bad captioning on television. And the first thing to look for is a transmission error, because if it's really, really bad, then most likely it's going to be a transmission error, because most people aren't going to get on the air. If y'all are on Facebook and saw the first Republican debate, there was this post about it looked like a cat was walking on the keyboard. Well, the poor person captioning that did an excellent job, but there was a transmission error between that station and the sister station. So it was the same person, only one person did it, but it was routed to so many different organizations that something happened in the transmission. So if it's really that bad, it's most likely going to be a transmission error. If you see blocks and numbers and characters instead of words, then that means that the telephone line is bad. There's a bad connection. We're kind of getting away from using telephone lines to connect to stations, but there's still some stations who use that technology. And it's a very, very old modem. At one point when we used to dial up for the internet, it was 56K. Our modems that we have to have are 1200 baud modems. So very, very slow, old technology. But encoders are approximately $8,000, and TV stations are slow to upgrade their encoders. And y'all may or may not know this, but to do captioning, you have to have a separate software program. So if you're on Eclipse, then you buy an additional program that allows you to do captioning, connect to the stations. If you want to do CART, you can use your court reporting software, and your screen needs to be reconfigured. It shouldn't look like a deposition screen. About 15 years ago, there was a study done where they brought in a lot of hard of hearing people, and it was in Texas, and they decided on the majority of folks in that room liked a blue background with yellow letters. It was easiest for them to see. When we finally got away from, the gray letters with the gray background with the black letters, and technology advanced, we did that study, and that's what they like. So most of the time, that's what you'll see is a screen. I always hate to see a picture of a CART screen that looks like a deposition transcript, because that tells me that that person really hasn't done any training in CART whatsoever, and they're really, a deposition reporter, and they shouldn't be in that situation. I also hate seeing student software on pictures. People will post pictures of their CART screen, and it says Stenograph student software, and you're thinking, really? Wow. You ought to cover that up somehow, take that out of your picture. But there is an agreement as a student that you guys have with Eclipse that you won't use your student software for personal gain. So that's something that they're looking into too. When they see those students post those pictures, they're like, okay, who are you charging for this and using your student software?
You need a break.
Huh?
You need a break.
If you want to take a break.
You want to?
It's entirely, let's take a break.
All right.
Does everybody want to take a break?
Yeah, I just have one quick question. What is
Okay.
you said that Eclipse has an additional software, but you use another software. What is the main software that you prefer, that you find most card capture prefer? What is your preferred?
I'm not sure I understand your question. I have the same software that you have. I mean, I have the professional version of Eclipse software that I use for CART. And then I purchased AccuCap, which is Eclipse's version of their captioning software. You wouldn't want to purchase another vendor's captioning software because they talk to one another. They use the same dictionary.
But
And some of the
does
same.
AccuCat have the artificial intelligence the same way that the regular Eclipse does? Or have you turned that off? Because you said you don't want to use artificial intelligence.
Right. when you buy AccuCap, there is, your key is upgraded to allow, you already have it as a student even, but when you are working as a reporter and you have the professional version of Eclipse and then you buy the license for AccuCap, they just upgrade your key so that you can access a different output format. And really that's all it is. So all of the things that you do in Eclipse are going to translate over into the AccuCap. And so mine is so intertwined I can't really tell you, but all of that artificial intelligence stuff is within the original Eclipse software. So if I had it on for one application, I would have it on for the other. I think that's the easiest way to say that. So let's take a real quick break.